Welcome to the new video of NeuroPhilos. Get ready to dive into a gripping tale that will leave you breathless, thinking, and inspired. Whether you're here for the mystery, the drama, or the unexpected twists, you're in the right place. Make sure to hit that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe so you never miss another powerful story. Let's begin. The betrayal of the self. You wake up each morning and step into a life that feels rehearsed. You move through the same motions, wake, work, smile, sleep, as though you are acting out a script written by someone else. You do what's expected, deliver what's asked, and keep everything in order. Yet deep inside, there's an echoing emptiness that no achievement or applause can silence. You sense it in quiet moments, an uncomfortable awareness that something essential is missing, that you are out of place in your own existence. You may have done everything right. You studied hard, worked responsibly, sought stability, obeyed the unspoken rules handed down by family and society. You became reliable, respectable, efficient. But with every step that followed expectations, a subtle betrayal occurred. Not of others, but of yourself. The life you built feels like a beautifully furnished house with no one truly living inside it. Carl Jung called this tragedy the betrayal of the self. It happens when you silence your inner voice in order to please, conform, or survive. You learn to smile for photographs, to repeat polite phrases that sustain the illusion of composure, to suppress the chaos underneath. Yet the psyche is not fooled. Every ignored dream, every swallowed truth, every moment of pretending adds weight to the invisible burden you carry. The anxiety you can't explain, the fatigue that follows you even after rest, the quiet sadness that surfaces in the middle of a crowd, these are not random feelings. They are the symptoms of a soul trying to awaken. We often mistake control for peace. We believe that if we manage every detail, career, relationships, reputation, we will finally feel whole. But control is a form of fear disguised as responsibility. It's a desperate attempt to silence the inner call that says, "This isn't me." Jung observed that the unconscious, the deepest part of the human psyche, never stops speaking. It sends its messages through dreams, impulses, synchronicities, and emotional unrest. When we ignore these signals, it's like turning off a fire alarm while the building burns. The external world may remain tidy, but internally, flames rise higher each day. The betrayal of the self does not happen in a single decision. It unfolds quietly, almost invisibly, through years of adaptation. You accept a career that offers stability instead of meaning. You stay in relationships that provide comfort instead of truth. You agree to play roles that earn approval but cost authenticity. And over time, you forget where the performance ends and where you begin. You tell yourself that this is maturity, that real life demands compromise, but what you've actually done is amputate your own instinct. Jung warned that such repression cannot last forever. The unconscious always seeks balance, and when neglected, it revolts. It manifests through anxiety, stagnation, or crisis, not as punishment, but as a desperate attempt to restore wholeness. That is why so many people reach a point where everything outwardly seems fine, yet internally, they feel suffocated. They've spent so long curating the perfect image that the real self, banished to the shadows, begins to knock on the walls of consciousness. This knocking may come as recurring dreams that disturb you, or as a persistent sense that you are meant for something else. You may feel drawn toward a change you can't justify logically, a new path, a distant place, a forgotten passion. These impulses are not random. They are calls from the buried self, whispering through the cracks of your constructed life. But most people ignore them. They label them impractical, childish, or foolish, and continue to chase what society rewards: order, status, applause. Jung described this cycle as living the unlived life of the parents. We inherit fears disguised as wisdom: be careful, be realistic, be normal. So we shrink ourselves into the molds of those who came before us. The greatest burden a person can carry, Jung said, is precisely this: the unlived life of another. We walk around carrying ancestral expectations like invisible luggage, never realizing that the weight belongs to someone else. And yet, the soul remembers. It remembers the story it came here to tell, the experiences it came to live, the creativity it came to express. Every moment of restlessness is that forgotten story trying to reassert itself. But answering this inner call is not easy. It threatens the structure of everything you built: your identity, your relationships, your sense of safety. That is why so many people keep living half-lives. They would rather endure quiet suffering than risk dismantling the mask. But Jung's single rule for anyone seeking wholeness was clear: stop living a story that is not yours. This isn't a motivational slogan, it's a psychological law. The psyche cannot thrive in falsity. To become whole, you must face the parts of yourself you have exiled. The fear, the desire, the instinct, the creativity, everything that was deemed too risky or too irrational must be brought back into light. This is the beginning of individuation, the process of reclaiming yourself from the expectations of others. It starts not with grand decisions but with honesty. With recognizing the small moments when you say yes but mean no, when you smile but want to scream, when you follow rules that no longer make sense. Awareness is the first crack in the facade. Once you see it, you can no longer pretend you don't. The betrayal of the self ends the moment you decide to stop lying to yourself. You don't have to abandon your life overnight, but you must begin to live it consciously, to question, to feel, to choose. Because pretending may win you comfort, but only truth will bring you peace. And somewhere deep within, your real story is still waiting, patient but insistent, for you to come home to it. The call of the alchemist. There comes a moment, subtle yet irreversible, when the routine no longer numbs you. The familiar rhythm that once seemed safe now feels suffocating. The laughter at work sounds hollow, the plans you once thought mattered begin to blur. You start catching glimpses of something unspoken, a pull toward elsewhere, a voice whispering, "There is more." That moment, quiet but seismic, is the beginning of awakening. It's the same call that haunted Santiago, the shepherd boy in Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist. Santiago lived a peaceful life. He had his flock, his open fields, and the comfort of routine. He knew every sunrise and every hill, every sheep by name. To anyone else, he was fortunate. But inside him lived a restlessness that no pasture could silence. It began with dreams, recurring, persistent dreams of a treasure buried near the Egyptian pyramids. He tried to ignore them, to focus on his sheep, to convince himself that contentment was enough. Yet the dreams would not leave. They returned again and again, until they no longer felt like imagination but command. Jung would have called this the voice of the self, the psyche's deepest center, speaking through symbols when the conscious mind refuses to listen. For Santiago, the treasure was not literal gold but a psychic map, a coded message from his own unconscious. Every dream, every coincidence, every encounter was the language of his inner world, trying to guide him toward wholeness. Jung believed that the unconscious communicates in myths and metaphors because truth in its pure form is unbearable. It disguises revelation as story so that the ego can approach it without shattering. The call of the alchemist, then, is not a call to adventure, it is a call to authenticity. It arrives as discomfort, as dissatisfaction, as an inexplicable yearning to break free from what is known. It is life itself urging you to evolve. But because we fear uncertainty, we resist the call. We rationalize our unhappiness. We say, everyone feels this way, or I should be grateful, or it's too late to start over. And yet the whisper grows louder. The soul has infinite patience but zero tolerance for lies. Santiago's choice mirrors the crossroad that every person faces. One path leads to safety, the continuation of the familiar story, the acceptance of inherited definitions of success. The other path leads into the unknown, a territory without guarantees, where all that guides you are signs and intuition. Qualo disguises this ancient psychological truth as a fable, but its essence is Jungian. The personal legend that the old king, Melchizedek, speaks of is none other than the process of individuation. It is the journey from the persona, the mask we show the world, to the self, the totality of who we are. When Melchizedek tells Santiago that, when you want something, the universe conspires in helping you achieve it, he is describing synchronicity. Jung defined it as a meaningful coincidence between inner states and outer events. When your conscious will aligns with the deeper will of your soul, the world begins to respond symbolically. People appear at the right time, opportunities open, obstacles transform into lessons. Life ceases to feel random, it begins to mirror your inner transformation. But that alignment comes with a price. It demands surrender. The rational mind wants certainty, the soul demands faith. Santiago must sell his sheep, abandon his identity, and cross a desert for a dream that may not even be real. The same is asked of you, not literally, but psychologically. You must be willing to let go of the security of definitions, the comfort of labels, the illusion of control. You must risk the death of who you think you are to discover who you actually are. And yet, like Santiago, most people hesitate. They fear ridicule, failure, or regret. They cling to the stable job, the predictable relationship, the scripted future, telling themselves it's responsibility. But Jung warned that what we call responsibility can often be disguised fear, the refusal to grow. The unconscious does not punish such choices, it simply withdraws its vitality. Life becomes dull. Joy fades. You start existing rather than living. Santiago's first step is also the most difficult. He decides to trust the unknown. That decision, to follow an inner sign rather than external approval, is the pivot on which all transformation turns. The moment you choose authenticity over expectation, the alchemical fire is lit. Everything false will start to burn away. The journey that follows is never linear. There will be losses, betrayals, and mistakes. But Jung said the self guides through what he called circumambulation, a circular path full of detours. Each wrong turn, each delay, is part of the process. The psyche never moves in straight lines, it spirals, always returning you to the same themes until understanding takes root. In that sense, Santiago's story is every person's story. The shepherd in you longs for safety, but the dreamer in you longs for freedom. Between the two lies the fire of transformation. And the moment you decide to listen to the whisper, that inner certainty that defies logic, you begin to walk the same invisible path that millions before you have walked, the road from imitation to creation, from repetition to revelation. The call of the alchemist is the moment life stops asking, "What should I do?" and begins asking, "Who am I?" It is the voice that reminds you that happiness is not comfort, it is truth. And when you dare to answer that call, everything changes. The world, which once seemed indifferent, begins to shimmer with meaning. Signs appear, coincidences multiply, and even pain begins to make sense. That is the beginning of real magic, not the manipulation of reality, but the recognition that reality itself is alive, intelligent, and speaking directly to you. The question is, will you keep pretending not to hear it, or will you, like Santiago, finally begin your own journey toward the treasure that was calling you all along? The mirrors on the road. Every seeker, once the journey begins, discovers that the world starts speaking in mirrors. Each person met along the road is no longer just another face, they become a reflection, a living fragment of your own psyche, projected outward so that you might recognize what lies within. Santiago's encounters in The Alchemist are not random episodes of adventure, they are the very architecture of inner transformation. Paulo Coelho's fable is, in truth, a psychological map of the soul, and every character Santiago meets is a manifestation of his own divided self. The first of these mirrors appears in the form of Melchizedek, the mysterious king of Salem. He arrives at the threshold of Santiago's decision, the exact moment when doubt threatens to smother courage. Melchizedek represents the archetype of the wise old man, the ancient mentor that exists within all of us. Jung described this figure as a projection of the self, a divine spark that emerges whenever the ego is ready to awaken. The king gives Santiago two stones, Urim and Thummim, symbols of discernment between yes and no, light and dark, fate and choice. Their message is clear, the path is not random, meaning hides behind every coincidence. When Santiago accepts them, he is not receiving a gift but acknowledging the birth of his own intuition, the voice that will guide him long after the mentor disappears. Soon after, Santiago meets the Englishman, a scholar obsessed with reading alchemical texts. He embodies the intellectual mind, curious, analytical, and yet trapped in abstraction. The Englishman knows the formulas, the symbols, the terminology, but he has never lived transformation. He wants the philosopher's stone without enduring the fire. Jung called this danger intellectual inflation, mistaking knowledge for wisdom, information for integration. The Englishman represents the part of us that reads about self-discovery instead of living it, that memorizes sacred words but refuses to surrender control. Santiago's frustration with him mirrors our own inner tension, the conflict between the heart that wants to experience and the mind that wants to explain. Through this contrast, Coelho whispers a warning: the soul cannot be theorized, it must be lived. Then comes the crystal merchant, perhaps the most tragic figure in the story. A kind man, honest and hard-working, yet paralyzed by fear. He dreams of one day going to Mecca but has spent his entire life postponing it. He tells Santiago that he prefers to keep the dream alive rather than risk disappointment by realizing it. He represents the archetype of the conformist, the ego that resists death. Jung saw this as one of humanity's greatest prisons, the comfort zone disguised as duty. The merchant's shop shines with crystal, but his life is opaque. He is frozen between longing and fear, living proof that comfort without purpose becomes a silent coffin. And yet, the merchant is not evil. He is painfully human, a reflection of our most familiar cowardice. How often do we preserve our dreams as fantasies precisely because we are too afraid to live them? We say, "Someday I will," and cling to that promise like a charm against change. The merchant teaches Santiago, and us, that dreams postponed too long turn into regrets that no success can erase. His story is the warning of what happens when the soul's call is ignored. But not all mirrors show paralysis. Some reveal transformation already achieved. That is where the alchemist himself enters, a figure both real and symbolic. He speaks little, acts decisively, and sees through illusions. He is not there to teach Santiago formulas but to force him into direct experience. "You already know everything you need to know," he says, echoing Jung's belief that the self holds all wisdom within. The alchemist represents the integrated self, the inner master who appears only when the student is ready to dissolve the ego completely. His lessons are paradoxes. To find gold, you must accept the fire. To move forward, you must surrender control. Each of these characters, then, is not external but internal. Melchizedek is the awakening of faith, the Englishman, the trap of intellect, the merchant, the temptation of safety, the alchemist, the embodiment of wisdom. Santiago's journey through them mirrors the psychological pilgrimage of every person who dares to live consciously. Each encounter is a confrontation with the self, each choice a declaration of what kind of human being we are willing to become. And here lies Jung's deepest insight: every figure you meet in the world is an aspect of your own unconscious. The people who inspire you are reflections of your unlived potential. Those who irritate you are projections of your unhealed wounds. The outer world is not separate, it is the stage where your inner drama unfolds. To travel outward is to meet yourself in disguise. Santiago's mirrors remind us that the spiritual path is not about escaping life but entering it fully, seeing every encounter as a message. When someone challenges you, life is showing you where you resist change. When someone supports you, life is confirming your direction. When someone leaves you, life is teaching you detachment. The entire universe, once viewed through Jung's lens, becomes a dialogue between consciousness and destiny. The further Santiago travels, the more he realizes that the Real desert is not made of sand but of illusion. Every human being must cross it. The mentors, the skeptics, the merchants, the alchemists, they are all voices inside you, and each demands recognition. You cannot skip them, you must integrate them. Only then does the fragmented self begin to form a whole. And perhaps that is the secret Paulo Coelho hid in plain sight. The Alchemist is not a story about finding treasure, it is about meeting your own reflections until nothing remains but truth. Each mirror burns away a mask. Each encounter refines you like metal in flame. Until, one day, you no longer see others as strangers at all, you see them as pieces of your own soul guiding you home. The fire of transformation. Every true transformation begins with fire. Not the kind that burns wood or flesh, but the kind that consumes illusions. In The Alchemist, Santiago's journey across the desert is not merely geographical, it is psychological. It is the stage Jung called mortificatio, the death of the false self. The ego, inflated with control and certainty, begins to crumble. The safe, structured life that once defined him dissolves in the heat of truth. This fire, though painful, is sacred. It is the price of awakening. Santiago learns early that loss is the first teacher. The boy who set out dreaming of treasure is quickly robbed, left penniless and alone. That moment is not punishment, it is initiation. The world strips him of security so he can discover strength. The first rule of alchemy, Jung wrote, is that transformation requires decomposition. The old structure must collapse before the new one can emerge. The breaking point is not the end, it is the door. In the desert, Santiago's faith is tested again and again. Every plan fails, every certainty melts away beneath the sun. And in that emptiness, something radical happens, he begins to listen. Without comfort to protect him, without logic to rely on, he starts hearing what Jung called the voice of the self, the quiet inner knowing that exists beneath thought. The same voice speaks to all of us in moments of despair, when the familiar world disintegrates and only silence remains. That silence is not void. It is the furnace of rebirth. The fire of transformation often arrives disguised as suffering. A heartbreak, a loss, an illness, a failure. We call it misfortune, but the unconscious calls it necessity. Jung said that the psyche will do anything to be whole, even create suffering if that's what it takes to get your attention. Pain is the soul's last language when all others have been ignored. The things that collapse around you were never truly yours, they were scaffolding built by fear. When they fall, they reveal the raw architecture of who you are. Santiago's endless walk across the dunes mirrors the human process of purification. The desert is merciless, but also magnificent. There, stripped of distraction, he must rely on intuition alone. He learns to read omens in the flight of hawks, to sense meaning in coincidence, to trust the invisible. The alchemist tells him that the desert tests every traveler, it removes what is false until only truth remains. This is the essence of inner work. You cannot carry unnecessary weight into enlightenment. Jung's alchemical stages describe this same process. The first stage, nigredo, is darkness, the dissolution of everything familiar. It feels like failure, confusion, depression. The second, albedo, follows when clarity begins to return, when intuition shines through the ashes. The third, rubedo, is integration, the red dawn of new life, when spirit and matter unite. Santiago, though unaware, walks these stages in perfect sequence. When he is robbed, he enters nigredo. When he begins to listen to the world's language, he moves through albedo. And when he meets the alchemist and learns to trust the fire, he approaches rubedo. But there is no bypassing the burn. The ego resists annihilation. It clings to identity, status, comfort, logic, anything to avoid dissolving. That's why so many people stall in the middle of their journey. They mistake the discomfort of change for a sign that they are lost. In truth, discomfort is proof that the transformation is working. Fire hurts only while you still cling to what must go. Santiago's trials reveal that transformation is not about gaining something new, it's about losing everything false. The alchemist tells him, to transform lead into gold, you must let the fire do its work. In Jungian language, this means confronting the shadow, all the parts of yourself you have exiled, the anger, fear, envy, desire, vulnerability. The more you suppress them, the more they sabotage you from below. To face the shadow is to stand in the fire willingly, knowing that what burns away was never truly you. This symbolic death happens to everyone who dares to live authentically. The career collapses, the relationship ends, the image crumbles, and suddenly the life you knew turns to dust. It feels like failure, but something beneath the wreckage stirs, a small, steady light. That is your true center, waiting to be born. Jung said that the self cannot emerge while the ego rules unchecked. The destruction of false order is not chaos, it is liberation. When Santiago begins to understand this, the desert changes. It no longer feels like punishment but preparation. He realizes that the same fire that destroys also illuminates. Every hardship refines him, every loss purifies him. He starts to see meaning in what once seemed cruel. That shift, from resistance to acceptance, is the turning point of all inner journeys. The moment you stop asking, why me, and start asking, what is this trying to teach me, the alchemy begins. The desert, then, is a mirror of the soul. Every grain of sand is a lesson in humility, every horizon a reminder of how small the ego truly is. When Santiago finally looks within instead of around, he hears the quiet harmony of all things, the same voice that guided him through dreams now echoing through the wind. He understands that the treasure he seeks cannot be reached by avoiding pain but by passing through it. The fire of transformation is not gentle. It will break your illusions, test your patience, and strip you bare. But once the flames die down, what remains is indestructible. Santiago emerges from the desert no longer a boy chasing a dream, but a man embodying it. He has learned what Jung and every mystic before him knew, that suffering is not the enemy of the soul, it is its crucible. And when you, too, walk through your own deserts, when life dismantles everything you thought was solid, remember this: the universe is not punishing you. It is purifying you. It is asking, as it once asked Santiago, are you ready to become gold? The treasure within. When Santiago finally reaches the Egyptian pyramids, he collapses at their base, exhausted, blistered, yet radiant with hope. He begins to dig furiously in the sand, convinced that the treasure he has chased for years lies beneath his hands. But life, as it always does when we expect certainty, humbles him. He finds nothing. Thieves appear, beat him, and mock his dream. He is left bleeding beneath the indifferent stars, stripped of possessions and purpose. Yet in that moment of utter defeat, something irreversible happens: he awakens. The revelation arrives not as divine light but as irony. One of the thieves laughs and says he once had a dream of treasure buried under a ruined church in Spain, exactly where Santiago's journey began. The boy realizes, with stunned clarity, that the treasure was never here in Egypt. It had always been waiting for him back where he started. The circle closes. The outer quest dissolves into an inner understanding. The real treasure was not the gold, but the transformation itself. Jung would have called this the final stage of individuation, the return to the self. After wandering through darkness and doubt, after shedding false identities and confronting his shadow, Santiago discovers that what he sought was never outside of him. The journey was necessary not to acquire something new, but to remember what he already carried within. The treasure at the beginning was invisible because he had not yet become the person capable of seeing it. Consciousness must travel outward before it can look inward and recognize its own reflection. This is the paradox of every seeker's life: we go far from ourselves to finally meet ourselves. We chase love, wealth, fame, or purpose, only to learn that what we were truly seeking was meaning. And meaning cannot be given, it must be lived. Santiago's gold, unearthed beneath the church floor, is symbolic of that realization. He needed the desert to purify his sight, the losses to break his pride, the mentors and betrayals to reveal his depths. Only through that fire could he return home transformed, his eyes clear enough to see what was always there. Jung said, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens." Santiago spent half his life dreaming outside, searching for a literal treasure, until pain forced him inward. That is the destiny of every human being, to wake from the outer dream of identity and begin the inner journey of integration. The world tells you that fulfillment lies in achievement, in applause, in reaching the pyramids. But the psyche knows otherwise. It knows that fulfillment is the alignment of your outer life with your inner truth. When you stop betraying yourself, when you stop living the stories imposed by others, the treasure reveals itself naturally. Santiago's journey is a mirror of our own psychological pilgrimage. Each of us begins as the shepherd, secure but restless. Each of us meets our Melchizedek, the inner voice that dares us to want more. Each of us faces the crystal merchant, the temptation to settle for safety. And each of us must walk through our own desert, where illusions burn and the soul begins to speak. The treasure, as Jung would say, is the self-made conscious, the union of who we are with who we were meant to be. But this awakening carries responsibility. Once you see, you cannot unsee. To live awake is to live truthfully, and truth often demands courage. It asks you to dismantle old relationships built on pretense, to leave behind work that no longer nourishes you, to stop playing roles that silence your soul. The world may not applaud this rebellion, but the psyche will. Wholeness has a cost, but its reward is peace, an unshakable knowing that you are finally living your own story. When Santiago stands again before the ruined church, the same wind that once carried his sheep now carries something new, stillness. He digs at the roots of a sycamore tree and finds a chest filled with gold and jewels. Yet as he holds the treasure, he does not laugh or cry. He simply smiles, serene and complete. The material gold is beautiful, but it no longer defines him. He understands that the real treasure was the journey itself, the courage to follow the signs, to lose everything false, to trust life even in desolation. This ending, radiant in its simplicity, conceals Jung's deepest wisdom. Individuation is not escape, it is return. You do not transcend the world, you re-enter it fully, with eyes awakened to its meaning. You eat, work, love, and struggle as before, but nothing feels the same. The sacred hides in the ordinary. Every sunrise becomes a message. Every encounter, a reflection. You are no longer a wanderer chasing omens, you have become the alchemist of your own soul, capable of turning experience into understanding, pain into purpose, and chaos into clarity. Santiago's story ends where it began, but he is no longer the same boy. He has died and been reborn as a whole being, ego and soul united. The journey of the treasure is the journey of consciousness itself, outward for experience, inward for meaning, and finally home for peace. That home is not a place, it is a state of being where you can finally say, I am who I am. And perhaps that is the secret Carl and Jung both tried to teach us, that the world conspires not to give you riches, but to wake you up. Every delay, every disappointment, every loss is the universe whispering the same truth. Stop searching outside and start remembering who you are. So when life beats you down, when your dreams collapse into dust, do not despair. That is not failure. That is the treasure calling you home.